she said, what is this guy doing there? A German guy knitting, living in Japan, riding motorbikes, doing Guinness. Who is that? I want to meet this guy. So she came to one of my class. I like the fun part. I always say happy knitting. I say it's knittertainment. I want to make people happy. I want to make people have a good time and enjoy what they're doing and create something they really treasure.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in. If you're enjoying the show, subscribing is the best way to support us. It helps us grow and bring you new stories from life in Japan. All right, let's jump in. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Bernd Kestler. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're a knitter,
yes,
as maybe it is obvious from everything we've got laying around on the table.
And I brought some today.
Knitting is a topic we haven't talked about at all. It's a topic I know nothing about, and you are extremely passionate about. So we have so many things to dive into. But before we get into knitting, I'm curious about what brought you to Japan in the first place.
What brought me here? I'm here now for 28 years. So I came here in 1998. And I originally learned landscaping. And I studied horticulture. And while I was studying horticulture, I worked for one of my professors who had a company for management training courses. And I did some computer work there. I mean, that is really before internet age. Mm-hmm. That is a very different time. And at that time, it was the bubble era here in Japan. And a lot of German companies were interested. Why are Japanese companies so successful? So they asked me to research on Japan. So I started to go to different libraries. And honestly, there was nothing. There was no videos, nothing. I started using fax modems at that time. So, so I had to go here and there to do research. And I just became so interested and curious about Japan that after I finished my horticulture studies, I completely changed course and took on a supplementary course in Düsseldorf at the Heinrich Heine University. They called it Regionalwissenschaften Modernes Japan, Regional Science Modern Japan, and it was a 2-year course. And after graduating there, I thought, I really would like to work in Japan. And finding a job from Germany in Japan was really not that easy.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Honestly, there was no email. I had my first landlady to find accommodation. I used the first time a computer fax modem. Took me 15 minutes to send the fax at that time. So I was actually lucky that the German Chamber of Commerce, they suddenly sent me a job offer from a Japanese interior design company. They were looking for somebody for sales and marketing in their department, particularly speaking German. Wow. That was my entree to Japan. And honestly, I never found out why they wanted somebody in German because I usually spoke English.
Once you got the job?
I got the job, yeah.
That was your first trip to Japan
I did a homestay in Japan before. For 3 months. I did an internship for 3 months, and I had a homestay of 2 weeks. And after the 3 months at a German insurance company, I was even more determined to live permanently here or long term.
When people study Japan or Japanese language for a while and they start building these aspirations of going there and experiencing the country, it can sometimes be quite different from the reality of actually being here. Since you also started from working for that management company, doing all this research, which got you interested, what made you even more motivated to move here more permanently during those internships? What were these impressions you had in your first few stays here that kind of made this impact on you?
It was just so different. Every day was really like an adventure, the challenge, really to be able to get here, to live here, and the people I met here were fantastic, and the land itself, the landscape is beautiful, and the food is yummy, of course. But I felt really at home. I really felt I belong here. It was really like coming home, not going somewhere, but coming home, but coming here.
Which areas did you stay when you kind of first came?
When I first came here, it was Tohoku area. So the first company I worked for was in Yotsuya. And I lived very close to Shinjuku Gyoen in a tiny little apartment the company gave me. And I grew up in a countryside, in a little village with like 1,000 people. And suddenly being in Tokyo, in Shinjuku, it was like day and night, to be honest. That was really, every day was like, this is amazing. I mean, it was really, the impact was just really cool. And when I first came here, the first day, I came here a few days before, and the first day I went to work, I had the most terrible cold. It was probably the time difference and everything. I was so cold. And on my way back, there was a little mom and pop shop. I bought a water kettle because I had nothing in my apartment to cook. Empty. I just had a fridge from the company, but nothing else. And I was desperate to get something hot to drink or make some soup or something. So I bought a water kettle. That was the first thing I bought in Japan. And I still have it.
You still have that?
I still have it and I still use it.
Wow. This is quite the memory. Just using this now 20 years later.
It's still there and it still works perfectly. And it reminds me of my first time here in Japan. It was really cool. I think the shop is closed by now.
How long did you end up kind of working for that company that you got a job at from the Chamber of Commerce?
I worked there for 2 years. And then I changed to an American company. It was a furniture company. They had a new president and he wanted people to go around and do sales and market. I mean, the usual job you do. Mm-hmm. And then I changed a few times jobs and like what most foreigners here do in Japan. And then ended up starting to knit.
So there was a point when you decided to leave the kind of corporate path to focus on knitting.
Yeah.
And I think before we dive into knitting, it might be interesting to actually go back to Germany and understand why you got into knitting in the first place. It's not necessarily one of the most common hobbies, I think, for people growing up.
That's true.
To go through, like, let's say, the general arts or music or sports. Yeah. How did you get into knitting?
I started knitting when I was about 10 or 12 years old. And I have an older sister and I have an older brother. They're 2 years older and my brother is 4 years older. And my sister, she could already knit, but I couldn't. So my sister usually knitted some sweaters for me. Mm-hmm. But at that time, she suddenly had a boyfriend. And what happens is, of course, the boyfriend is more important than the younger brother, and she knitted for the boyfriend. And my sweaters took longer and longer and longer, and the boyfriend's sweaters were much nicer than mine. So I got so frustrated that I thought, okay, then I do it myself. So one day I picked up a book. My mom, she had a book on knitting, and I picked up some needles and some leftover yarn. And I started to learn how to cast on stitches. And then I think the first thing I knitted was a vest, because I didn't know how to make the sleeves. So I made a vest. And I used it for a long time, actually. And I just kept on going. And it was so intriguing to make something suddenly. I was able to make my own things. And my mother, she could knit, but she was never really so good. My sister, she was quite good, but later on she went more into sewing, but I kept on knitting. And I started knitting socks. I was interested to have the finished piece.
So not necessarily the process, but more like the feeling of, I made something myself.
I made something for myself. Now it has shifted. Now it's a little bit different. But when I started, I wanted to have a finished piece. I wanted to have a hat or socks. Mm-hmm. And I was intrigued to figure out how it works. Because really, I mean, nowadays you have videos, but at that time I had a book or somebody told you how to do it. But both my grandmothers, I don't think they ever knitted. And nobody could really show me. So I really had to figure it out myself.
It seems quite difficult. I mean, you've written many books yourself. We have some of them here on a table. And I kind of took a quick look at it. But if you've never knitted yourself, I was just like, what is this all about? Like, where do I even start, right?
Yeah.
So what was the kind of the challenge for you to make this first vest, and how did you approach this without having really anyone teaching you and just the book?
Well, the book already told me the first thing you need to do when you start knitting, you only have yarn.
Mm-hmm.
So you have nothing than a pair of needles and a little bit of yarn. That's it. And the first thing you need to do, you need to make stitches. Knitting is you have a loop in a loop in a loop.
Okay.
So first you need to make what's called the cast on. You need to cast on stitches. And if you want to knit something that fits you, you need to figure out how many stitches do I need so that I have the right size. Yeah, you can have, if you have very thick yarn, you need less stitches. But if you have a very thin yarn, you need to have more stitches. So to do that, you usually start to make a little sample to figure out how many stitches do you need to make.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Other pieces, when you knit, for example, a shawl, you just knit until it fits you. But when you make something like socks or gloves,
and made to measure, so to say.
Yes, then you need to first measure your size and then make it. So the first challenge was really how to cast on. And I know I looked at this book and I tried to figure out how to, and pictures are only two-dimensional, but knitting is very much three-dimensional. So to figure out how to...
Because there's a lot of feel to it, right? You need to find out how exactly to pass the needle through and how to loop them properly. Otherwise, it just falls apart.
Yes. And after that, in knitting, you have actually only two stitches. You have a knit stitch and you have a purl stitch. In German, you say rechte Masche oder linke Masche.
Okay, so right or left.
Right or left. But in English, you say knit or purl.
Okay.
Yeah, and in Japanese, you have omoteme and urame.
So like a front and back.
Front and back stitch. And these two stitches, then, when you combine them, then you can make patterns. So the first challenge for me was really, how many stitches do I need so the thing fits me? And how do I actually make them? And I know I was sitting on my floor, have the book in front of me, and try to figure out how to cast on these stitches. But finally, I made it.
And you got your vest.
And I got my vest. And I don't know where it ended up. I have no idea where, but I used it for a long, long time. And I remember it was in blue and yellow, and I even added a pattern in stripes.
So you start knitting, you get interested into it, specifically in making your own things. When you moved to Japan, I imagine you continued knitting a lot. Did you find a community of people here? Was it a very kind of a hobby, or that you were just doing for yourself in your time off work?
Yeah, that was it. Really, I kept it as a hobby. Also, throughout the school in the 80s, it was very fashionable to knit again. We had lots of knitting stores, and then it kind of faded out. Mm-hmm. And during that time, actually, there were a lot of men starting to knit, which is at that time was very rare that men were knitting. And even if you look at old video footage from the German government, some from the Green Party in the beginning, they were knitting in the German parliament. So you could see them knitting.
Interesting.
And after that, it faded out, but I kept going. And even at that time, I already thought of, I wish I could make knitting my job. I remember that I was thinking that, but I didn't know how. So I kept it as a hobby. I was knitting green socks when I had to join the army. I was knitting on guard. We had to do something. So I was knitting green socks, and they didn't like that, but I kept on knitting my green socks. And so it was always a hobby. And when I came to Japan, I thought, where can I find some yarn stores? And in Tokyo, there are some big stores selling yarn, and there's some very good Japanese yarn makers. And I thought, I can use that. So I kept on doing it more and more as a hobby. I never really thought of doing it as a job.
Was knitting popular in Japan at the time? Were there like
Yeah, it was at that time it was quite popular. It's coming and going. Now it becomes a little bit more popular right now because also the internet and video and makes it more accessible. But you also have other things people get interested in. So it's competing with other things. But yes, at that time it was quite popular. And a lot of people were knitting. And at that time also machine knitting was popular, but I never really got into that. But you could find very, very good stores and really nice yarns also. Not so much imported, but a lot of yarn here made also in Japan.
So you find your yarns, you have this dream of maybe making this as a job one day, but you eventually actually do.
Yeah.
When you decide to leave the corporate world, what is your idea of what you're going to do with knitting? When you say you kind of going full time, what did it mean for you at the time?
Well, first of all, it was knitting is not a so well paid job at that time. Yeah, even now, it's not easy to make enough money to really live from knitting. And even in Europe, not many people actually do that, to really live only from knitting. At that time, I was doing Aikido sometimes, many years ago. And my Aikido sensei, he did the same thing. He had a different job, but he loved Aikido. And at some point, he jumped the boat and he became a full-time Aikido instructor. And I thought, if he can do that from Aikido, I should be able to do that from knitting. And I thought, okay, I'm alone. I have nobody depending on me, and I had some money in the bank. And I thought, okay, let's try if I can make that work from knitting. And near where I was living at that time in Yokohama, there is a small culture school in Hiyoshi. And I talked to the owner, and she had a similar experience. She was living in America and came back and then started to build up this culture school. And she was very open to say, oh yeah, let's start and make a class. Because I said, I know so much about knitting. Even techniques nobody here in Japan really maybe knows. I could teach them a lot of new techniques, new ideas, new patterns, new concepts. So let's make a class. And beside, I can speak English. So if they want to communicate in English, we can do that. So it was kind of an interesting concept. And she said, oh yeah, let's try that. And we started with the first class, and I'm still doing it.
You still go to Yokohama regularly for the class?
Yes.
You mentioned that you were able to teach techniques that were not so popular here in Japan. How different is or was the knitting culture in Germany versus Japan in terms of how the yarn was being used and what was made with it?
Well, knitting is the same. I mean, the technique is the same everywhere. Japan history knitting is very short. It's probably 150 years. In Europe, it's extremely long. So we just have more or had more time to think about knitting. And in Europe, knitting was extremely useful. When you look at Northern Europe, where you really need warm clothes, you had to make it. And it was extremely important that you had warm clothes to knit them for yourself. So here in Japan, with a kimono culture and different kind of clothing, knitting was not so much needed at that time. Besides, sheep were not so much available.
True.
And wool. They only were, I think, 1600 something. They had some sheep. Yeah, they came, I researched. They came once in the 800s. Okay. But then it kind of...
Only 1,600 sheep.
1600, the year 1600, it came to Japan. At that time, and then because also the agriculture is not really in Japan so much adapted to raise sheep. It's more in Hokkaido. You need larger plots of land. So, and knitted clothes is also not so useful in Japan with a hot and humid climate. So you want more looser and more airy clothing. So using cotton or hemp is much more suitable for the Japanese climate rather than wool. So it's just historically, it's a little bit different. So the techniques and the knowledge about knitting is not so much. And beside, I can read English books and German books, and then, so I just know a little bit more.
Knitting for yourself and experimenting and having fun is one thing. Suddenly having a class and teaching others and kind of maybe being responsible in a way is something else. How did it go when you kind of had your first class? What were the students interested in when they kind of came to you to learn more about knitting?
I brought some of the pieces I knitted. And we didn't make any curriculum because I thought everybody has a different opinion what they want to knit. And they have a different skill level. And some are beginners, some are very advanced. So I thought if I make a curriculum, it maybe serves one person, but not the other. So it's kind of boring. So I said, okay, let's do it this way. Everybody knits what they want. and I bring some of my things. And then we go from there. And a lot of people just wanted to, I want to knit this, I want to knit this. Or they brought some books they had. Some people had instructions from other countries they had. So we had to figure out how to do that and how to knit that. So it was really more like a one-to-one all the time.
In a group space, and you would walk around and kind of spend some time with each student. Wow.
Yes. So it was not really like sitting there and everybody does the same thing. And beside in Germany, I mean, we have this Kaffeeklatsch. People, they gather at somebody's home, somebody brings cake and the kids are coming and they're knitting and they're chit-chatting a little bit. And we did the same at my class. So we had coffee and we had cake and they could chit-chat and they could talk. It's a very social thing. Sometimes they talk more than they need. But that's okay.
Keeps people in good spirits, though.
Yes. Yeah. And the social aspect, actually, knitting or handicraft, I think is really important, because for some people, they really enjoy that, to have some interaction with them. One lady said, I had an elderly lady, she came to another class, she said, I just want to meet young people.
Oh.
She just said, I live alone, I have nobody, and I just want to meet more younger people. And she enjoys knitting. So people have sometimes very different reasons for coming. Or they say, I want to learn that particular piece I saw, or I want to understand that item, the instructions I have here, or they bring some books and they say, I don't know how to do that. Can you help me with that?
How difficult is that for you then, if they, for example, bring something that is something you've never seen or never done before as well? Because then you need to teach them, but you also need to figure it out for yourself. Yeah.
Sometimes when it's an instruction, especially if there's self-made instructions, you first have to really go through and think about how is this, or what do they want to do, and how is that knitted. But it worked. And sometimes I just have to try out a little bit and say, okay, let me knit myself, and then I can show you. But so far, it always worked out somehow. Or we can find another way to do it. I mean, in knitting, there's always, you can do it this way, or you can do it that way, and you can find another way. And sometimes we find we want to change the size, but we say, okay, we want to keep that pattern, so we adapt it and make it. That's the fun part in knitting.
Before we started recording, you kind of started explaining to me how you knit based on a chart you design. But in this kind of situation, let's say someone brings you a finished product, like these gloves that you made. Are you able to, if you've never seen this before and done this before, to figure out kind of where the starting point is and what the process is to get to the end of a product?
In most cases, you can see what kind of technique they used. To make probably a complete 100% copy, the exact item might be difficult depending on what you're knitting. But in most cases, we can kind of figure out how to make something that will do the same thing or looks very similar. I mean, from a color gradation on that piece, I could already see how it's knitted.
Okay.
Because the color tells you, is it knitted sideways? Is it knitted top down? Or and then when you look at it close, you can figure out where they started. And then from there, you can kind of figure out how to make it. I like to keep things very simple. Simple is usually the best. So sometimes we see something that is constructed very beautifully, but a little bit more complicated. And then we say, okay, if you want to do it exactly that way, this is how we could do it. Or if you want to have a simpler way to do it, we can do it this way. So then we can find out how to maybe make that. Or if we have an instruction, we can go through and read it.
You mentioned that the history of knitting in Japan is not that old. And one of the reasons was that based on the climate here, they didn't necessarily have such a need for these kind of clothing. But also because of that, have you noticed that they have used knitting techniques to create things in different ways to kind of adapt to their needs that you hadn't seen or experienced in Europe before?
Do they have something? Socks is always an issue in Japan. I mean, tabi, for example. In Germany, we don't have tabi. But here in Japan, you have tabi. So that is something, I knitted some tabi, and we want to show them in my next book. That's something very fun. And I had never seen that. And I had to figure out, what is a tabi and how do we make it? And when you look at, for example, kimonos are made from straight pieces of woven fabric, and they're not cut.
Mm-hmm.
In knitting, you can shape the piece any way you pretty much want. So that is something in Japanese clothes making that is a very, very different concept. For example, when you have a hanten, everything is very much straight because the fabric is straight. Knitting, you can shape it, and Japanese have great techniques. They're very good knitters, to be honest. They're very skilled.
Wow.
Even if it's not so long. I mean, I've seen some ladies that can knit amazingly fast. My class here in Osaka, they're like knitting machines, to be honest. They knit extremely fast and extremely accurate.
So for someone that knows nothing about knitting, what does knitting fast look like? If we take, again, this pair of gloves, for example, what will be a normal pace and what will be a fast pace to make this?
I can make it in a day.
Okay.
If I start in the morning, I'll finish probably in the afternoon.
Okay.
My size. So I can knit, I know how to make it. If I don't have to look at the chart, if I just have to knit basic pattern, I just can do it. I can knit, for example, a sock.
Mm-hmm.
If I have to start knitting a sock. If I have to do it, I could do it in one day. Usually it takes me maybe 2. For somebody, but that's me. I mean, I need to do it. It's my work. I need to sometimes finish it very fast.
Mm-hmm.
For example, this large blanket here, the tapestry, that took me months to finish.
Yeah, this is really cool. We can try to show it on camera later. It's this blanket that when you look at it from the side, you see a kind of illustration appearing on it, but from the front, this is quite impressive. And we'll probably talk about it in a little bit.
And that is something, it's called shadow knitting. And that is something I first saw here in Japan.
Interesting.
Because the very first book was actually published here, I think it was either 1978 or 73, by a local publishing company. And they published it was called Kakushie Ami or something. And it had very simple geometric motifs, just circles and squares and triangles like this. But I had never seen anything like this before. And now it's more popular probably outside Japan than here in Japan.
Interesting. Shadow knitting.
Shadow knitting or illusion knitting. And there's some people now making it, but I just love that technique. It has this surprise.
Yeah, I mean, I was wowed when you kind of first showed us this before. I imagine this would be considered like kind of advanced level knitting.
Yeah. Well, actually, from a knitting point, it's really easy to knit because it only has knit and purl stitches. So there is no decrease, no increase, no fancy stitches, nothing. It's a very simple, even a beginner can make it. It just takes a long time. And you really have to follow the chart. And the chart has no repeat. Every row is different. And that makes it so boring actually to knit because you really have to sit at the desk. I have a chart of about 2 A3 size pages. And I have to really go through the lines one stitch by one to knit it. Takes ages.
So this is something you found here in Japan before.
Yeah.
You started your knitting career, so to say, professional career at that school in Yokohama at which you're still teaching. I imagine if you had one class, you were doing a few hours per week and such, probably not enough to kind of live from. How long did you continue doing this and what kind of opportunities came from teaching those students that started coming?
Well, the first class, we gradually increased students. And then I started another class in Tokyo at another culture school, which I still do, but by myself now. So I have the same class in Kamata. And so I had 2 classes, and then we started to do some workshops. What really then started was bookmaking. That was after the Tohoku earthquake with Fukushima. And I did a campaign for the people living in shelters. We called it Knit for Japan. And Because after the earthquake, everything was pretty much shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting at home and the supermarkets were empty and everybody's saying, oh, you should go back to Germany. You should go back to Germany. So, okay, what do I do? What do I do? And I filled up my motorbike with gasoline in case I had to kind of get away a little bit. But I was sitting at home and my classes were closed for the time and I really had nothing to do and everything was not working. However, suddenly I received a parcel from Germany. And it was a 3 months late Christmas present. And it had wool inside. A friend from Germany had sent me some yarn. Some not exactly that maker, but some similar yarn.
Mm-hmm.
And some chocolate, Christmas chocolate, like Weihnachtsmänner.
Always good to have.
And it was really like, I had no idea. I mean, everything was shut down, but a late Christmas present arrived. So it was kind of, okay, somebody is kind of telling us something. And I was looking at the yarn and I thought, oh, I should knit a hat for the people in Tohoku. And I thought, okay, well, if I can knit one hat for people in Tohoku, maybe I can ask other people to knit. So I started to collect pieces for the Hinanjo and the shelters up in Tohoku, and also some yarn and needles. And I asked some of the shelters if they would like to get some yarn and needles, and we did some workshops. So I did some volunteer campaign. And I got some really nice letters from that, to be honest. People were really happy because one lady actually said, I lost everything. My house, everything is gone. But thanks to the yarn I got from you, with my friends, we could sit down and for 2 hours, I could forget what happened to me. So she said, really thank you for that 2 hours. That was really helpful for me. So we did this campaign. And after that was finished, and we did also a Guinness record on that, we made the largest crocheted blanket in the world.
Wow, how big was that?
470 some square meters.
That's huge.
Yeah, it was big. I had 11,000 20 by 20 centimeter crocheted motifs, squares.
Where do you even put them together? You need to have a space big enough to...
I kept all the motifs in my house. I was sleeping on motifs. had motifs. My whole house was filled with motifs. And then, honestly, I didn't do that by myself. I had lots of people helping. And honestly, I deserve a tiny little bit of that. But my name is on the certificate. But
where is this blanket now?
Actually, the purpose was we wanted to make blankets for people living in shelters. And while I was talking to a friend, we said, oh, well, we can make lots of blankets. Oh, and then we can make the largest blankets. Oh, then we can make the world's largest and get a Guinness record. The Guinness record was not the main purpose. The purpose was to make a lot of blankets to give to people so they have blankets. So I started to collect crocheted motifs from all over the world. I got from Brazil, from America, from England, from everywhere.
People would kind of knit something in this size, more or less, and just mail it to you, and then you stitch them all together.
Yes, this was not knitted; it was crocheted with a hook, and they're called granny square. And granny squares are then connected into blankets or other items. So we collected 11,000 some granny squares, and then I had a lot of people helping to make them into 10 by 20 blankets. And then those blankets were finally all put together at a place up in, I think, Ishinomaki, at a sports gym.
Oh,
and then there was a professional company to measure the size. And then a gentleman from a company that was helping me, he actually deserves a lot of credit for getting the Guinness record because he did all the paperwork. He did everything, and suddenly we got the Guinness record. So I don't deserve it. Actually, all the people who helped deserve it. So it was fun. And from that exercise, from that project, one of my students from my class in Hiyoshi, she is an illustrator for books. And she said, oh, this story is so nice. We should make it into a book. I said, okay, I don't know any publisher. I know so many publishers. I will ask them. I said, I don't think they'll be interested, but go ahead. If you want to ask them, ask them. And she did. And she asked some publishers, and most publishers, they said, oh, come on, not really interested. But one lady from a publisher, from this publisher, from the Socks book, She also speaks very good English. And she said, what is this guy doing there? A German guy knitting, living in Japan, riding motorbikes, doing Guinness. Who is that? I want to meet this guy. So she came to one of my class and said, I want to know what you're doing. I said, yeah, come on, I show you what we do. And we knitted, and I taught her a little bit of knitting. And she said, oh, I would love to make a book with you. And we talked a little bit about that and what kind of topic we want to make a book. And at that time, I found this spiral socks. It's not my invention. It's a very old technique. And I found a 100-year-old patent on somebody made it. And I knitted it. And I thought, oh, that's kind of fun. And I brought it to my class. And the students, they were crazy about it. They go, oh, this is cool. We want to knit that. We want to knit that. I said, okay, I'll make you some charts and we can knit that. And this publisher lady said, that's a great topic for a book. And we made the first book.
What are spiral socks?
Spiral socks are simple socks that are knitted without a heel. The sock has a heel.
Shape at
the shape that turns from the upper part to the foot. There is a heel. And you can knit them, of course, and it's not difficult to knit, but it's a 3-dimensional piece. And to show that on paper, I know it's difficult to understand. A spiral sock has a simple pattern that makes a spiral. So when you put the sock onto your foot, the spiral just fits perfectly around your foot.
Interesting.
Without any excess knitting left. So it fits perfectly around you. It's perfect. It's really cool. And in Japan, people love knitting, but the heel is always the problem. But with these spiral socks, you can just knit. It looks like a long piece of bread or something. It's like a sausage. And you just start knitting, always the same amount of stitches. You have a very simple pattern. And you need to make them for the last part, you need to decrease stitches and then finish it. And fits perfect.
And so that turned into a book, your first book. And this is what kind of really cemented your start as the professional knitter. It's an interesting turning point because you got your start into knitting by picking that book off the shelf at home as well. And in a way, you kind of came full circle here with that. What was the experience like for you to turn your knowledge and experience into a book and not just into a kind of oral class that you were transmitting, but actually thinking about how to structure this on paper and how to explain it to someone like your younger self in a way that was kind of trying to figure this out by himself? Yeah,
first I had to find out how to make charts. I mean, to explain something, or sometimes you can scribble something on a whiteboard, but how to make really professional charts. And the book charts, they're not mine. Of course, the publisher, they take the pictures and they have people, professional people, to really then make the charts in a way that they can be published. For a book in Germany, I made the charts, but usually here in Japan, the publisher. But of course, I have to make a chart so the person understands how the piece is knitted. And you have to really then think about it. Which yarn did you use? How long do you have to make the piece? Do you use all yarn? It's also, of course, it's a money issue, how much yarn you're using. And socks yarn usually has 100 gram. And to make 2 socks, so that works usually perfectly.
So this yarn here, for example, is for socks specifically?
Is socks yarn, yes.
And you can make basically a pair?
You can make one pair.
Interesting.
Yeah, you probably have a little bit of leftover. Socks yarn is wool and nylon mix. It has usually between 70 and 75% wool and 20 or 25% nylon. The wool lets your feet breathe because especially when you wear socks in your shoes, you want to make sure that the foot is breathing, and the nylon makes it strong enough because you always have friction when you walk. So
if it's just wool, it will kind of like fall apart quickly.
And if you use acrylic, then you have a plastic.
Which will prevent the breathing again.
Exactly. Then you have really not a nice experience when you take off your shoes. So socks yarn is yarn. You can make other pieces from socks yarn, of course. You can make hats or gloves or sweaters or anything else. But to make socks, usually you use a sock yarn. So I had to learn all of that first. I knew socks yarn, of course, but how to make charts, and then making enough designs so that it's enough for one book, and to have a real concept. How do we do that? And work with a publisher. And I never really thought about it. I always was dreaming about making a book, but then really making it was a very different process.
You explained earlier that when you started your first class, you decided to not go with a curriculum because everyone wants to knit something different and everyone has like a different level.
Yeah.
So when you kind of approach this, how do you decide how much context, how much information the reader will need? For example, I've never knitted anything. Would I be able to make the socks from this?
Yes, they can.
So this is more like beginner friendly.
Yes. This is honestly anybody who wants to learn knitting socks, they can pick up that book and they can do that. And of course you have to, when we started with the book, of course the publisher gave me a lot of guidance in terms of how much contents do we need? How many socks do we need? That is determined also how many pages do they want to print? Mm-hmm. How thick will the book be? And they have like standards, the size and how many pages, and do all pages need to be in color? Because that's also a cost issue. And so the back of the book is usually knitted in black and white, where you have the how-to and the charts. With other publishers, they also printed everything in color, which then makes the book more expensive. Mm-hmm. Also the paper you're using, and how do you sell the book later? When you have odd shapes, they can't put it in the shelf. So there are a lot of things, but that's everything that the publisher knows. So they just told me we need about this amount of socks. And of course we need somehow the charts, and they can do that. And then we decided also, because I'm from Germany, that we want to use a German yarn. So we had to first of all get the yarn to Japan, and then all the students at the class in Hiyoshi, they actually helped making the socks. So they're all knitted socks. And I usually do that. They get the piece back later, and of course no charge. And I put the name in the book, and I put of course, the pieces are in the book, and everybody gets the book. So they're knitting basically for themselves. And then I get the piece and we show it in the book. So they really enjoy that.
You said earlier that you found some really quality yarn producers here in Japan. But for the book, also because you're from Germany, you wanted to have German yarn. Is there a big difference about the place of origin, or is it more about like how it's being made and by whom, or what difference does it really make?
The quality in Japan is excellent. There is not so much socks yarn available in Germany, and especially this colorful socks yarn at that time was not so widely available yet here in Japan. Now it has changed, but at that time we thought, okay, we want very colorful. We want to make it a very bright book, very happy, very fresh colors. And we wanted very bright yarn for that. And because given that I'm from Germany, we thought, okay, that connection might be very nice. So we can also show some German yarn. And we showed some Japanese yarn too, but mainly we showed German yarn. And that worked really well. People really enjoyed the colors. They said, oh, the colors are so fresh. The colors are so beautiful. We really like that. Mm. And when we started, I thought, okay, let's really make basically the same sock in variations. So we only have to explain one time how it's made, and then people can pick up from there and make some changes to it. So if people want to change the size, they can easily add or take out some amount of stitches and make them bigger or smaller. If they want to use different yarn, they can also change that quite easily. So that's why I usually like books that have a very narrow topic, because it makes it easy for people then to learn about it. If you have too many things, you need to explain a lot and you don't have so many color pictures left.
Or it ends up being very superficial and then nobody really can make advantage of this. But this book was quite niche and quite focused. Yes. And this being a turning point, I'm curious about what happens when this book is being released, and how does it affect then your career after that?
Actually, the company published quite a nice amount of books, and they were sold out within a month.
Wow.
They released it, I think it was October, and it was sold out. They suddenly called me. I was on a workshop, and the publisher called me and said, "We have to reprint."
That's like the best news you want to hear.
It was kind of, actually, a knitting book being reprinted already is not so often.
Mm-hmm.
But to be reprinted in such a short time, within a month they were sold out either. And they had to reprint again. So within 3 months, they printed and reprinted twice. And they're still reprinting the book. It's still selling.
It's still a classic in the knitting community.
It's perfect. Nobody had done spiral socks before. It was, honestly, by chance, I stumbled onto something. I was very lucky, I guess, being just curious. And of course, the knitting history is not so long. Socks knitting is extremely popular in Europe. I mean, everybody knitting socks. And knitting heels, I learned when I was probably 14, 15, you learn how to knit a heel. So it's not so new to me, but I understand that knitting heels is a challenge for people because it's 3-dimensional and how to figure that out is really a little bit challenging. So having a sock that is just knitted without a heel was just completely new. And people really enjoyed that.
So 2-3 reprints and more reprints later.
Yes.
And I imagine the publisher is then maybe thinking as well, oh, maybe we can make more books on more topics. You ended up doing many more books, some of them on actually quite specific techniques, marling and brioche, which I don't really know exactly what they mean, color gradation, and a lot of European knitting techniques.
Yeah.
So, which brings me to the following question. When you have to explain something that is kind of pre-existing in Europe, maybe the books have been written about this in German with a lot of knitting specific vocabulary.
Yeah.
How do you translate these to Japanese? How do you bring them to Japan if maybe some of the words are not there or some of the concepts you have to explain are not there?
Yeah, but after the socks book, I mean, the socks book is easy because you just knit and purl stitches. So that is, in Japan, the charts are extremely well made. And all the symbols in the charts are actually defined in the Japan Industrial Code. But for some techniques I'm using, there is no symbol. So I have to invent symbols. I have to sometimes make my own because there is none. For example, when we used what's called short row knitting, where you knit triangles or odd shapes and make it into patterns or shapes or something. For this kind of knitting, there's one particular stitch that has no symbol. So I had to invent my own symbol. And that technique in Japan is not so well used. It's used to maybe shape a sweater, the shoulder of a sweater, but short row knitting is an extremely versatile knitting technique. You can make breathtaking, like stained glass pieces. And I wanted to show people the fun of it and the joy of it. And I showed it in my class. And then actually the publisher decided also to make a book about that. And that is also very nice and people enjoy that. The other book you have here, that was based on, it's just knit and purl stitches. Because one day I was just wondering, would it be possible to only use these 2 stitches without anything else, without decreasing, increasing, or anything else? No, just these 2 symbols to make a book. And the publisher was interested in that and said, oh, let's make it. And it's still reprinted. And
how many books have you done so far?
15.
15 books.
15 books. 14 in Japan and 1 in Germany. And 1 book has been translated into Korean. The socks book was translated into Korean and to Chinese and German. So some of the books are translated by German publisher. And with the same publisher, I made a book directly.
So I imagine releasing those books also creates more interest in more workshops and more classes. And
Yeah.
then suddenly, before you know it, you're kind of running around the country, knitting on the Shinkansen, in classes, and also quite often at Komeda's Coffee.
Yes, I was there this morning knitting here. I started the next sock for the next book. I started this one this morning. The Komeda thing is, they're very nice. And I have a class in Nagoya. And the class in Nagoya is at a rental space. Not at a culture school, it's at a rental space. So the rental space allows me to go in 15 minutes before the actual time starts. When we start at 10 o'clock, I'm allowed to go in by 9:45. But I usually arrive a little bit earlier, and I thought, oh, where can I wait? And a friend of mine, Miyuki, she said, oh, there's a Komeda, we can go in. I said, what is Komeda? Oh, you don't know Komeda? I'll show you. So we went into Komeda. Oh, this is really nice. This is really cool. This is how this whole thing started. And of course, Komeda is a very nice chain. And it's a little bit spacious and very quiet, and they have beautiful light.
Oh.
Then usually they're on the first or second floor, so the light is good for knitting. And so, oh, this is really nice for knitting. And I started to go there whenever we were in Nagoya, we started to go. So it became like this running thing. And then at some point I said, oh, this character is really cute. So I made the Komeda character, I knitted it. And then I made little finger puppets with Komeda. So this whole thing suddenly started to take off. And whenever I go riding and I find a Komeda, I go to Komeda. It's just this, and they're very nice people. And they contacted me, and there was a TV program about Komeda. So they asked me to come, and I was on the TV program. So it's fun. They're really cool. And I like the coffee there. And it's quiet, spacious, good light, nice music. Very relaxed, so it just is a perfect environment for knitting.
You mentioned doing the Komeda character, and then the company reached out and you work with them. But before we started recording, you were talking about how difficult it is for you to make some creative work using characters that have like IP regulations, whether it's for exhibitions and such. So if you want to kind of do not just typical knitting for, let's say, your clothes, but motifs on blankets or tapestries and such, you have a lot of things that you need to kind of be mindful about.
Yes. The Komeda character, of course, we talked to Komeda and we asked for their permission to use the character in my book. And they kindly agreed, and they said, yes, please do. So they were very happy. As long as I make things for myself, I can do that. Commercially, I can't use it. So when I use other people's artwork, for example, I can make it for myself, but I can't use it commercially. Or I need to ask the copyright holder to ask them to agree. I wanted to, as I said, Hello Kitty, and I love the character, and it lends itself perfectly to the shadow knitting, and I wanted to make a book. And at that time, the publisher also made books on Hello Kitty, but I said, why don't we make a book together? But they said, we're not so much into, we want to concentrate on our core business. I would love to work with a manga publisher and make a knitting book with manga. That would be so cool.
That would be awesome, yeah.
I knitted a manga. Of course, I can't use it, and I don't. I mean, it's their copyright. It's fair enough. I mean, I don't want people to copy my stuff, so I don't copy other people's stuff. But it would look absolutely awesome. And the technique is so easy. So I would love to find a manga publisher who says, oh, yeah, we love this idea. Let's talk about it.
Let's collaborate on this.
Let's collaborate and make something like this. And that would be really cool, because the technique is not difficult, and I can make the charts easily. And it would look absolutely fantastic in a book, I think, or even videos or whatever. I mean, nowadays.
The image I have of knitting is you mostly knit things to wear them, or maybe a blanket. What are some creative things that can actually be done, that you have done or you are dreaming about, that can be achieved by knitting?
With knitting, basically, you can do anything you want. I haven't found anything I could not knit yet. I honestly, I don't know what else can I make that I knitted lamp covers, which is fun. And of course, you can make tapestries and carpets and interior items, of course, things to wear. I mean, head to toe, you can do anything. Sculptures, you can make knitted sculpture. I have a fantastic German book about, it's probably from the 60s or 70s, knitting in different ways. I mean, they're textile artists, they make interior, they make sculptures. You can also crochet amazing pieces. You can make sofas. There is, I think in England they did that with waist rope. They made large tubes and then put these yoga balls inside you can sit on. I love lamps. I knitted a great lamp. I once wanted to knit a lamp without any wires or anything inside. So I knitted it and then I used epoxy to stiffen it. And I used a big yoga ball inside and blew it up. And then that was really quite time.
Has this ever
intense.
led to a sort of like a knitting art exhibition at the museum to showcase the diversity of possibilities?
Not with many pieces, but 2 years ago, there is always, I live in Gifu City. And every year, the local museum does an exhibition for people living in Gifu. And you can enter pretty much anything you want, and you have photographers. And I entered one of my lamps with this pattern, with this spiky pattern. And I have a huge lamp. And inside, I have an acrylic tube. And I have a beautiful wooden base. And then it's like a long hat, knitted hat. And you put that over. And when you put it on, it's just beautiful. Now I'm into mobiles. I love mobiles, and I want to figure out how can I use knitting. I made one knitted mobile, but I'm not satisfied yet. I want to. The problem is over knitting is soft, so I was thinking to use epoxy. The problem with epoxy is it turns yellowish after a while. So I tried glue, which also doesn't really work well. Now I'm thinking of using wire.
So you kind of have to start thinking beyond just the yarn. You have to think about like what can the yarn be combined with to get the desired result.
That's when I started knitting, I wanted to have a finished piece. Now I'm more interested in the process.
When did that change?
After I got bored of knitting sweater after sweater. Then it really took on as how far can I take it? My benchmark is that there's a famous Japanese kimono dyer, Kubota Ichiku, and he does the most amazing. He's my benchmark. I once went to his museum in near Kawaguchiko. He already passed away, which is a pity. He did Tsudigahana dye kimonos dyeing, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, to be honest. It's absolutely breathtaking. I think his son is still alive and runs the museum. If you ever have a chance, go there. It's worth. I went there and I thought, I'll stop. I finish. There is nothing with knitting I can do that would actually get to that point.
Wow.
He's my benchmark. Honestly, I stood there and said, I'm done. Why should I even continue knitting? But then I thought, hang on a second. Let's see what we can do. And I started actually, when I looked at it, dyeing is something, he does shibori. So he wraps it and then he paints it and then he unwraps it and takes a year to make such a kimono there. You can't describe how beautiful they are. There are no words, actually. You need to go in. And when you line them up, they make a panorama, which is even more breathtaking, to be honest. There are 10 kimonos and they make one picture. So it's stunning.
How is it for you we were talking about how knitting itself wasn't so big in Japan, but they were making kimonos. So they had their own technique to make garments. And there are also like all these typical dyeing techniques, indigo dyeing, botanical dyeing.
Yeah.
How have you found ways to combine knitting with those Japanese techniques to kind of create something new?
Japanese color palettes are fantastic. I love Japanese color palettes, and I love aizome.
So that's the indigo dyeing.
It's the indigo dyeing. It's the typical Japan, and the history is fascinating. And I went to several indigo studios, and you can of course dye yarn with indigo, and then you can use that dyed yarn to knit pieces. You can dye cotton. Any plant fibers are usually better to dye with indigo. You can do wool, but wool is usually repellent and it doesn't dye so easy. It works, but usually plant dye or silk works also. And I used that a lot. I made beautiful sweaters with which I dyed the yarn myself. And then you can, when you dye yarn, you have what you call a cassette. It's like you put it together so you can actually dye the yarn. You don't have a ball to dye. You need you fix it together in a
you attach
shank.
it to something
and then you hold it together with yarn, and then you can dye it. And afterwards you have to wind it up into ball again.
Okay.
And when you dye, you can actually cover, like shibori, certain areas of the yarn so they're white, and then other areas are blue. You could then dye again with different colors, but Izumi usually have this one color. Or you can have shades of the blue. So I use that in some of my, I love it. Izumi is absolutely fantastic.
Cool.
You can also use kaki fruits. I dye it with kaki, which makes a beautiful brown, grayish colors. I did kusakisome, the plant-based. I did a workshop on that. You can use different plant-based materials.
So you would take a yarn that has like a plain color and then just dye it yourself at home?
Usually you can get it in white, and then you can dye it, or you can over dye something if you want to. You can also use other dyeing techniques and use artificial colors or pigments, but use Japanese color palettes. I have books on Japanese color palettes. I mean, when you look at the kimonos, the color palettes are just stunningly beautiful.
It's fascinating how from a yarn and two techniques, like right, left, or however they're called, depending on the language, so much can be created, including some of these beautiful pieces you brought on the table. And I want to just talk a little bit about those, because we actually haven't really touched them and kind of seen what they're made of. And this one here in particular was quite interesting with all these spiky patterns. And can you maybe explain a little bit what this is and kind of what makes it so unique?
This is a very old pattern I found probably in an old book on the internet. And it's from 1846.
Oh, that is quite old.
It's a very old pattern. And at that time, ladies were interested in fruit-shaped bags.
Like a durian or pineapple.
Exactly. And that was a pattern for a pineapple bag.
Ah.
And when I saw that, I thought, oh, that's a cute pattern. In many countries, there are no charts. The piece is explained in words. In Japan, everything is charted. And in Japan, each publisher uses the same chart. But that book didn't have any charts. So I thought, okay, if I want to show my people in Hiyoshi, I need to make a chart. So to make the chart, I knitted it. And I thought, okay, what can you make? I took out some yarn, cast it on some stitches, and while I was knitting it, I made a chart. And when I finished it, I took it to the class, and all the ladies, they were, wow, we want to knit that, we want to knit. This is so cool, this is so cool. And it became kind of my signature pattern. And from that pattern, I then started to make variations. I made it smaller, I made it bigger. I made it in different colors. I made it with lace pieces around. I knitted a sweater, I knitted pants, I knitted my lamp, I knitted gloves. It's in my socks book. I made a hat, everything with this pattern. So I usually don't like to knit the same piece again and again and again. So I change it. So after I knitted the first cape, I wanted to learn more how can I control color, like Kubota Ichiku. When I looked at his kimonos, I thought, how can I use what he did with knitting? And I started to experiment in yarn dyeing. I started using different yarns. I started to experiment in painting my stuff after I finished it, what he did. Shibori usually doesn't work so well with knitting because it's too thick. The paint will go inside it anyway, so it doesn't work. Shibori is really, you need a big rope or something. Really tight, very tightly. And with knitting, you can't really do that so well. So I started to think, how can I make more gradations or colors that I want? Because knitting always, you knit either in rounds or back and forth. So the color is pretty much determined by your technique.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to make gradations. So this piece is knitted not with a knitting yarn. It's a yarn that clothing companies would use. Very thin yarn, like a hair.
Oh, which is, this is probably not the thickest, but it's
This is you would use 2 or 3 millimeter needles to knit this yarn. But I used very thin yarn for garment makers, but I used 10 together. And then I changed one at a time. And that creates then a smoother gradation.
Amazing.
And that took, again, I had to figure out how do I do that? And that's what I love. That's when you start to innovate. That's when you start, I make my own tools. I make my own, everything I need for that, because having 10 balls of yarn didn't work. And they're so thin, they always tangle up. So I had to make myself a stand. And the stand, I need to somehow put all the yarn together, and I didn't have anything. So I went to a home center. I love home centers. They give me lots of ideas. So I went to a home center. And when you look at some sinks in Japan, the drainage has a little plastic piece inside.
Yeah.
And that's divided into segments.
Yeah.
I used that to keep my yarn together. So I made my own stand to keep this 10 balls, and then I was able to knit it. And I love it. Absolutely love it.
You once said that your brain is made for knitting.
Yeah.
You think about it 24/7. You just
all the time. And when you put it on, it looks like this. And it's just like an experiment. I wanted to know how it works. I just want to figure out how can I do that. And then and it has all these. And knitting in Japan usually was a little bit more flat pieces. It was not so much making structures, but knitting allows you actually to make very interesting structures. Because also, I'm not an expert on weaving, but weaving also usually tends to be more flat pieces. But knitting, you can make extremely deep structures with that. And this is very easy to knit, to be honest. I can knit that without looking at any chart. It just is so simple to knit. But I wanted to see how I have this piece in probably 2 or 3 different colors. But this is the most interesting because it has this gradation going from this dark gray into this red. And I had to use 3 different colors. And then I have to make a color sheet. Where do I change colors? Because I have a certain amount of rows I need to knit, and I have a certain amount of colors I want to use, and where do I change? So I had to innovate and make complete new tools for myself. And that's fun. That's when knitting starts to really become fun.
It's an art form.
Yes.
It's like you spend probably more time conceptualizing, and drawing the inspiration, thinking about how to combine it than executing.
And then sourcing the yarn, and the garment manufacturer, the maker of the yarn, they were not too happy that I just wanted 1 kilo, but this 1 kilo has like 40 kilometers of yarn. 40 kilometers. It's 1 kilo, but it's so thin that it has.
You could just pull it from here to Kobe.
Exactly. And it's so thin, and they usually sell to clothing companies like 100 kilos or 200 kilos factories. And I just, can I have one? And say, okay. They charge me higher price for that, for handling. But it's okay.
Just like your sensei, Aikido sensei, you kind of figured it out how to become independent, how to make a life out of knitting. And you have all these amazing creations. Where does it leave you today when you look back at everything you've done for the knitting community here in Japan and worldwide, with your books, your classes, your creations? Do you see that it has drawn people in and kind of created a sort of positive movement for knitting?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. If I look, for example, the campaign we did for Fukushima, I have a box full of beautiful letters from people. I said, that was really great. Or when I came in and we talked to your colleague, she said, she started knitting because of my book.
Yeah.
That's why she started knitting, because she wanted to knit these socks, these spiral socks for her father. And these socks are easy to put on because they don't have any heels, so you don't need to worry so much about if it fits or not. It's easy to put on. And she wanted to knit that. So I said, wow, that's already, to be honest, one person picks up because of what I did. That's so amazing, to be honest. And I had other people that said, oh, your choice of color is so nice. Oh, we enjoy that so much. It's so wonderful. And we did last year this Akechi Tetsudo knitting train. We did a wonderful project. I love knitting on the train, and I was sitting. I said, actually, I should ride the Yamanote line all day just knitting and stream it live. And I said, that would be fun. I don't think JR would really like that. I think they would really kick me out after one round. But I was kind of thinking, that would be fun. Wouldn't it be, to do something? I like the fun part. I always say happy knitting. I say it's knittertainment. I want to make people happy. I want to make people have a good time and enjoy what they're doing and create something they really treasure. And I was in Gifu. There's a little village called Iwamura, which is beautiful. It's like Taisho era village, and I love to go there by my motorbike. And there's a beautiful little cafe, and I went there and we talked about this train thing. And I just mentioned it. One lady said, "Oh, I know Akechi Tetsudo, Akechi Railway. They're very close. I know them. I can ask them." So, ask them. And suddenly they contacted me and said, "Yeah, we love to do that. Can we do that?" And I said, "Okay, let's do that." And we made a project for a knitting train. And they were actually absolutely fantastic. They do lots of events. It's a little train going 25.1 kilometers from Ena to Akechi. And they said, we always make events, so let's make a knitting event. They gave us our own car. They put an extra car to the regular train. It's usually one car train.
So in one cart, all the regular
knitters.
Passengers, and in the other one, all the knitters.
All the knitters. And first, we actually said, okay, let's do it Friday, Saturday. They were immediately booked out. So she called me and said, can you do Saturday? Can you do Sunday? I said, okay, let's do Sunday. Boom. Booked out. She called again, can you do Thursday too? Let's do it. We had a waiting list. We had people coming far from Okinawa, from Niigata, from Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, of course, Nagoya, local, everywhere. People came to this knitting train event. And what we did, and it was really fun, we were on the train and people could knit. And then we arrived in Akechi and we went to, there's a beautiful cafe and omiyage, and there's like an old village. Mm-hmm. So they organized that we had coffee and they have a beautiful pudding, and we had some time there and people could knit and we could chit chat, and we decorated the train with my knitting pieces. It was absolutely amazing. And that's something that would be probably more common in Europe and not so much in Japan. That's what I would love to show more, because knitting is so fantastic. I want to show people more what they can do with that and how interesting. I mean, all you have is a piece of yarn and 2 needles, and that's it. No electricity. You don't need anything else, and you have magic in your hand. You can do anything. There is nothing you cannot knit. It's really fun. And I had one lady who actually was the illustrator for the book. Mm-hmm. When she finished her first hat, she finished a hat and she said, "Oh, it's the first time. Oh my God." And she was so excited. She was so happy. She was like running around the room. I made it. She was just so happy. That feeling you can't buy.
No.
That is something you have to. And that if that comes from just making and helping, I'm not knitting it for them. They make it. I just guide them a little bit. I say, "Oh, you can do it this way. Oh, you can do it that way. And maybe how about do it this way?" I just guide them. But they get this kind of feeling, or I knitted something for my parents, or I knitted something for friends. Absolutely amazing.
For people who are curious, just get yourself some yarn, get yourself some needles, get yourself a book about how to make spiral socks, and just start knitting.
Definitely. It's one of the best. I mean, can be knitting, can be crochet, any craft you can do. For knitting, what's so nice is that the amount of equipment you need is so little.
And you can do it everywhere.
And you can do it everywhere. That's why I thought knitting is great for people in Fukushima, because you can sit at the beach, for example, or you can have like a little town hall. You don't need much. Okay, in the evening you would need light, but you just need the needles and the yarn, and your best is to have some people, and then you start knitting and you have a little community together, and that makes so much fun and it excites people. You can relax. It lowers actually your brainwave. You can. It's like meditating. It's like zazen. You can do that. So it has a lot of positive effects. There is nothing negative in knitting, except when you mess up and you have to undo it.
I can imagine that is the frustrating moment when you realize you missed something, maybe a few lines back, and you're like, oh.
I have that sometimes. The other day I saw on Facebook, there's a knitting community, and one lady, she said, I made a mistake. What should I do? And most people say, just keep going. I said, no, undo it. You need to undo it. This is
just bite the bullet and just go back.
Yeah, I have the same. Sometimes I just then leave it maybe for 2 days until my frustration is gone. I know that I will undo it anyway. And then I just go about and that's the nice thing with knitting, because you still have the material. You're not wasting anything. You can.
It's not like fixed with glue or
not at all. You just undo it. You have the yarn, and you can go and knit it again. So nothing wasted. Just a little bit of time you maybe inputted. And sometimes when you learn something new, that's how it is. I mean, when you invent something, engineers probably have the same. They look for new solutions and they make mistakes, and you have to go back, and knitting teaches you that, probably from an early stage.
Bernd, we covered so many fascinating topics. I'm very curious if there's anything that is very important for you about knitting that we haven't actually gone into. We talked about some techniques. We talked about the community a lot, which I feel like is probably one of the most important parts of knitting itself. Yeah. But is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you would have maybe liked to bring up today?
Knitting? There's so much. It's just the fun part of knitting. I think it's important, and always keep going and trying out new things. Just sometimes I have the same. Knitting for me is really, I love this innovation, and it's not just I can use the skills not only for making something. I can use it in my daily life. You can learn a lot from knitting. Not just making yourself a hat or gloves, but you can learn really for your life a lot of things. How to innovate, how to make find your own solutions. I see that a lot of people think, if I can't buy it online, it doesn't exist. That's where the fun starts, I think. And nowadays, everybody is always on phones and applications, and knitting is so analog. But it's still so applicable in our times. And it still has a place in this technology-driven world we're living in that it's absolutely, I find that fascinating. It never becomes boring. It's 6,000 years old. The first piece that resembles knitting is supposed to be 6,000 years old. From somewhere in Egypt, they found something. And it's still applicable in our world. And I see a lot, especially when they say, I don't have it. I say, make it yourself. Why don't you find yourself? Why don't you find your own way? Why don't you find your own material? Why don't you do it? That's where it starts to become fun. And that's a skill you can use then in your job. If you're even in some mathematic teachers in the US, they use knitting to explain math.
Interesting.
Knitting is very much related to mathematics, probably like origami. You can learn a lot from that. You can learn endurance, patience, innovation. You can learn about, and all in a very safe environment. You can't hurt yourself, except if you stick yourself a needle. But there is nothing that you can't learn basically from knitting.
Life lessons from knitting. Maybe the topic for one of your upcoming books. Bernd, it's been a real pleasure to have you here to kind of hear your passion, and I just love what you've created and what you're continuing to build And I hope that more people will join the community
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love
and
to.
discover this. We'll put all the links in the description so people can find you and
Perfect.
reach out.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah,
Happy
thank
knitting.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow. I love how passionate you are about this. Thank you for sticking with us all the way till the end. We really appreciate it. If you haven't already, consider subscribing to the podcast. It helps us improve the show and bring you more in-depth conversations from Japan. Take care and see you next time.